what would be critical for, the larger Japanese corporations if they want to move forward and move quicker and be more innovative and embrace these forces of change from outside? I mean, from your perspective, having now lived in Japan for a while, worked for a Japanese corporation, worked on several projects. I mean, what do you think is a great way forward?
Start small, learn, and exit fast.
Yeah.
So, and those are three characteristics that you don't see here, unfortunately.
Right.
Um, we need to be able to. I worked for another corporation somewhere else in the world where the management was so paranoid they didn't want to start anything that had any risk associated. They wanted a riskless project, which doesn't exist, and they
Yeah.
spent more money waiting for that to happen than to actually execute just the first steps of it and exit, which would have cost far less. So, in other words,
Sure.
it became acceptable to have a bigger loss through inaction than it was to take a small loss to move forward. And I think
Right.
that we really, there's an urgency, not just in Japan, but everywhere, to rethink about how you take approval. So we've heard of, things like agile, and you hear the mantra, oh, we have to be agile. Well,
Mm.
we're agile in operations and in software development and all these sorts of things, and that's increasing around the world. But what we haven't changed is our finance and our recognition of risk. So
Right.
how do you actually now, instead of having a budget that you commit to at the beginning of the year and have to spend by the end, how do you
Mm.
make sure that, okay, well, I've stage gated this much investment. This is what at risk. If we lose, now it's finite. And as per real options theory, if it fails, you kill it. And if it works, you look at how you reuse it and how you go to the next step. So,
Right.
so if unless you're taking that step forward, you'll never have that learning, discovery, and there's a certain value in just having that experience and giving it a go. So many startups are known for pivoting. So many corporations, if you look at some of the greatest innovations around the world, have started out of failure. I mean, Tesla was a failure, and now it's the most valuable car company in the world. Like, and it,
Right.
it had literally, it was a failed startup.
Yeah. Actually, it
SpaceX.
was built. It was. I mean, Tesla was built on the bones of NUMMI, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
was built on the foundations of a failed, uh,
yes.
joint venture between Toyota and GM, right? I mean that's the bones of it, right?
Absolutely. And so what's interesting to me is I remember we had Elon Musk come to speak at a Start Me Up Hong Kong event, and
Mm.
I was running a kids accelerator there, and so he'd come and was presenting just before the kids. And
Mm.
what when he was being interviewed, he said, what's it like being an entrepreneur? And I'll never forget the quote. It's just embedded in my brain. I live it every day. He said, it's like eating glass and staring at the abyss. So if you remember, well, Tesla almost
That
crumbled,
sounds very scary.
Tesla almost died with production hell, if you recall that.
Yep.
Then
Yeah.
SpaceX blew
Yeah.
up twice, and if it blew up the third time, it was dead, right?
Yep.
Now, I'm not sure if you saw the latest launch. What happened when it blew up? Everyone
Yep.
was clapping and cheering because they realized they'd learned a lot and made progress,
Yep.
and that
Yep.
they were prepared for that outcome. You see,
Right.
too many organizations aren't prepared for the failure outcome and to look at what they can take away from it. And I
Right.
think that you see it, and Elon Musk, has his successes and failures, and whether you love him or hate him, you've got to admire that way that he approaches failure and risk, right? And the ability to keep driving forward even in the grimmest of times. And companies need to do that, because otherwise, and we see it happen with many past companies, including ones I've worked for, like Compaq, that aren't with us
Right.
today because they
Right.
refused to take those very small first steps to really changing the status quo.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I had a similar thought, many years ago when Steve Jobs left Apple and went to Next Computer,
Another almost massive failure, actually. Next, and
right.
Apple. Apple was right against the wall, right, when he came
Yeah,
back, having driven it
and
there himself.
Yeah, and I remember saying, there was a magazine in the time in Japan called Computing Japan, and somebody asked me for a quote, and I said, "Apple's rotten to the core." And now I look back on that, what I should have been doing is investing in Apple at the time, because I didn't realize that in the case of Steve Jobs, again, somebody positive and negatives, you can look back. He was driven in the same way that Elon Musk is driven to, something that's quite different about, innovation and having a startup and many startups and many failures within an organization, capitalizing on those failures and learning their way forward. And I think of, those are large, iconic, disruptive types of companies, but I also see that, they were against the ropes too. And I mean, they were built on the foundation of failures, actually. And that innovation in any organization is probably built upon that foundation of risk taking, accepting failures, and learning very quickly, what they can from those failures and taking it forward, right?